there are many similarities between the Netherlands and Louisiana. We are both situated on deltas, the Rhine Delta and our delta. To the acknowledgement of our similarities, the Dutch Rijkswaterstaat, similar to our Army Corps of Engineers, signed a memorandum of understanding saying that they would share knowledge and expertise on water management. And this collaboration, although seemingly new and trustworthy, is old and steady, as Dutch bankers were the first to finance the Louisiana Purchase. And during the many floods that occurred throughout Louisiana and Netherlands history, the 1953 flood in the Netherlands, devastating many, many homes, it was New Orleans engineers that gave them pumps to look for a brighter future, and that led to many of the innovative engineering techniques in the Delta Works projects. And in stepping back, moving Katrina and Rita, they assisted us, were the first to come and say, we want to pay back and help you in your time of need as your people are flooding in your homes and you need new engineering techniques. And so Senator Landrieu and many other notable leaders in our state, Kathleen Blanco, people at the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, organized the first congressional delegation trip to the Netherlands to share ideas and information. There was a second trip, which I was fortunate enough to go on, and then there's a third trip planned. But on this first trip, David Wagner of Wagner and Ball Architects, located out of New Orleans, noticed a disconnect on some of the main reasons, or some of the biggest interconnecting pieces of why we do things so differently and cannot properly manage water. And it's fundamentally in the way that we think about land use, natural resources, and occupation. And from that time on, he has led this effort to get international experts, raise lots of money for a collaborative process to occur called the Dutch Dialogues, which there have been 3 sort of charrette-type processes where they've created plans to assist the city of New Orleans in properly managing water, space, and land, occupation, housing, and so forth. And with that, just to introduce David and Derek, who at one time worked for David, aside from being an architect, David's also led many planning efforts, particularly the UNOT plan, the St. Bernard Parish plan, and he's known to the architecture world for innovative techniques with schools, civic buildings, just to name a few. He serves on many boards, has taught architecture at many universities, and is a member of many professional institutions. And on a personal note, David has been incredibly inspiring. He has poured his heart, his soul, his passion into reaching across the pond and ensuring that Louisiana doesn't stay the status course and moves forward with new innovative ideas. He's built bridges so that we can look to a new way of living with water successfully. Derek Hoferlin is an architect, and he works with both H3 Studio and Wagner and Ball. He frequently gives lectures and conferences and has received many awards for his work. And as a senior lecturer of Washington University in St. Louis, in collaboration with the University of Toronto, he has most notably spearheaded the Gutter to the Gulf project that advocates for integrated water planning for New Orleans. Please give these gentlemen a round of applause.
I see enough friends in here maybe to misbehave a tiny bit, and I see some people in here who've helped us with this process and others who need to help us. I heard today that we're tired of talking about Dutch dialogues because this is a conversation and we need to move past conversation. So a bit of this is retrospective, and we start way back in time, or we start in a frightening future with that image. This is a Chinese water city Shaoxing, and it might look a little like Venice. That's this city that we might also have to deal with, that we don't want to be the New Orleans future. People have always wanted to live with the water. It's the source of our life. It's elemental. This is, again, Shaoxing, which is near Shanghai. In Chinese education, everyone I know knows about Dayu. Dayu is a legend. He's a god almost, but he was a real man about 2,500 years ago, and basically he tamed the waters. So I start in China to say that the Dutch are good at this and probably the best in the world, and they've been working at this for 800 years or so, but these ways of working with water and living with water are older, because fundamentally it's why there's life. When Dayu came into taming the water, it seems to me, because I'm really from North Louisiana and kind of country in some perspectives, they just dug a lot. You know, I mean, if you take enough shovels and have enough Chinese people digging, you can find a way that the water doesn't go on the land anymore because you've created a lot of space for it. I don't have here, but if you would think about the plan of New Orleans, you would see that there's very little water. In fact, if you will go and look at the map of Jefferson Parish or New Orleans East and look at New Orleans in the middle of it, you'll see there's less water in New Orleans, surface water, if you exclude the river, than there is even in Jefferson Parish or New Orleans East, which is an anomaly. It means the water has nowhere to go except in our streets where we store it or in our cars or houses. So Suzhou, a more recent but a couple thousand-year-old water city in China, but European models moving closer to Holland. This would be Hamburg. These are high-value situations. This is not bad real estate. This is good real estate. This is that's Hamburg, and then Copenhagen, where the Dutch built this canal in the 17th century. Dutch architects built that canal because it's more than just engineering, isn't it? It's the buildings alongside, the life that occurs along the canal, the commerce that's there. Moving now into the Netherlands, this is the Westersingle in Rotterdam, which is really one of the key pieces that, Camille, we looked at on the second trip. This is a water management canal. The Westersingle really asked the fundamental question, which is how do we want to invest our money? That's flood protection. You can see two different sections of it. You see the freeboard where the green space is above the water level. You see it in some places, it's a plaza. But this is how the Dutch have decided to invest their money. Do they want to put it in pipes underground, or do they want to put it on the surface? They get a higher real estate value out of this. Old Amsterdam, fairly clear what they did, and this preceded the 17th century. And then the New Amsterdam, which is Iburg, where they're still building the canals. You notice no railings along that. That's a different legal context. I see Steve in the room, so it's a different legal context there. They also, and this is maybe not part of the talk, but it comes toward Derek, who I'll introduce now in a minute. I'll sit down and let him talk more. They teach their children to swim. We have a frighteningly high number of people in the United States who are afraid to swim or can't swim. The Dutch government funds swimming lessons so that the Dutch have the lowest incidence of drowning in the world. There are lots of educational components to this. This is not a 5-year problem. It's going to take time for us to learn to make this right. It's also clear, I don't know how many of you have seen this, I think we created this slide last year for this conference actually, that we are not the Netherlands. There's nothing that you can say we're just going to copy. Our situation is somewhat more difficult in many ways. We have more space, which is an asset, but we have a harder design problem. If you look at that storm surge, if you look at the levee, what it takes to get us to get a times 10, if you look at the peak rainfall, the peak rainfall we have is far higher than their peak rainfall. The 60 inches, 40 inches is not a big issue. The big issue is that deluge. So we also have other problems, and this eroding coastline is the first problem. So Dutch Dialogues was not set up to solve the coastal problem. The coastal problem is essential. We can't live with this situation. We can't have that future. We have ideas about how to alter that. They're good coastal scientists, and that part of the discussion is integral. These are not separable layers. And there is hope if we can control the river. But as I realized right after the storm, our issue in South Louisiana is a continental level problem. The drainage basin encompasses the whole continent, and we in Louisiana can't fix the whole thing. We have to advocate, and we have to become much more passionate and persuasive about our need. The second level of protection is the levee protection system. Dutch Dialogues was not intended to address the levee situation. This Gustav, I think, image is a frightening image. It's not a comfortable image. That's the industrial canal. This is outside the industrial canal, the MRGO closure that's being built. Whether ecologically it's the right approach or not, I don't know anybody from the Corps is here. It does provide significant storm protection. So that in fact is the closure structure at the MRGO. So within that situation, within those barriers, those lines of defense, coastal, then the levee protection, we started looking at the internal stormwater management thing, figuring that the one thing that the city of New Orleans and all its planning processes really could do something about was urban planning, urban design, and water. This is an image taken by Rami in my office right at his house recently, and it's not just hurricanes that cause us problems. This is not the way the first world's supposed to live. But we live like this because we pipe and pump. So I want to point out with this slide that this is an older problem and a bigger problem. I think if you look at that on the left, that was that report that was just issued by the Bureau of Governmental Research about the Sewerage and Water Board, and you see that 70% number there? That's the amount of treated water that is not being charged. That means we're losing it. So that's, yes, do I want to allow the computer to make changes? Program, no? Would you guys say no, or would you say yes? I'd say no. No. Okay. We're together.
It's the Sewage and Water Board.
That's, yeah.
Maybe I...
The Bureau of Government.
The Water Board. Anyway, the Water Board's an issue. But what worries you there is the lack of feedback. You know, if you're an intelligent person, you have to learn that if I drink 4 whiskeys at night, I'm going to feel bad the next day. Well, if I pump all the water out of my soil, and that on the right is showing you that in 1927 they understood that the soils were shrinking when they pumped it dry. Well, if they knew that in 1927, and in the 1930s they knew that the ambient temperature of New Orleans went up when they pumped it dry, why don't we adapt? Why do we continue a regime that doesn't work? Well, mosquitoes. Anyway, there are other ways. This is the Dutch process. This is the Dutch process of thinking. It's fundamental. It's basically the book in Europe now, which is you start planning from the foundational level, from the underground, as some people say, soils, water system, and that other important word there, which is biodiversity, because that also addresses mosquitoes. And then you get into the networks and infrastructure, and then we get to where we live, which is the occupation level. So a sustainable water system looks different from ours because it stores a lot of water where it falls, and it only drains it when it needs to, because what we want to do is keep it where it falls. That also saves energy, which is part of the big complex, isn't it? So Dutch Dialogues 1 and 2, quickly, we in Dutch Dialogues 1 only really had an exchange of information. This was a map that was done, a comparative map, I think that was done by DHV actually, and Piet Dirk from Arcata showed it. This shows that in fact the deltas are similar in size between the Netherlands and ours. And then there was a comparison of rules and regulations, and we operate in different conditions. They do not have flood insurance in the Netherlands. That's a higher degree of confidence than we have. They got a 10,000-year protection. We got 100, maybe. It's not a very good investment model. So then in Dutch Dialogue 2, we looked at 3 scales. And in transitioning to Derek, who's participated in both Dutch Dialogue 2 and 3, we look now at safety first. We looked at the multiple lines of defense. We're looking at urban, right? Number 5. But you've got to consider what happens on the outside to protect the inside. And then you have these backbones, safety levels, stormwater. Storage. That's interesting. Store water. But it's all for quality of life, because you're not building it to have a beautiful machine. You're building it so people can live in it. If you look at this left-handed drawing, you can see the line that goes through this Gentilly Ridge. You can see the idea of islands, which is supplemental protection of the lake, maybe, maybe not. Claiborne Avenue was identified by us, yes, but also permeated by the Dutch, as a key component for reconstructing New Orleans. I don't have to talk about that in this room, but follow. It's an interesting discourse that will go on. The middle scale we looked at was Gentilly, that yellow area. Gentilly, in fact, at that point looked like this. Hardly an urban situation, devastated, no trees. We looked at a plan for Gentilly that would introduce water. You see the island lurking out there because the Dutch love islands. They go on vacation somewhere every year, many islands. Elysian Fields. Because when you're doing water-based planning, you're also looking for long lines and connections. And with UNO there, it's a very important street. This rendering that seemed to get a lot of attention, even though we were saying, no, 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 we want to look inside the levees. But everybody wants to talk about the island outside the levees. Stormwater storage, a circulating system, and then on the right, different water identities. So some things are nothing more than wadis, or storage places. Some things are canals. Some things are actually water bodies. So they're different identities. There's no sole identity that water has to take. But it does need to move. This was a drawing, and it'll come back in the second part right after I finish here and turn this to Derek, about the outfall canals, which are a shameful waste of opportunity. You see what we have and what we might have. At that point, we thought. And lastly, we looked at the smaller scale, which was the Hoffman Triangle area, a low-lying part of the city. And if you look at that cross-section, north-south cross-section on the left, with the lake on the left and the river on the right, the river is very deep. It's a trick question to visitors, but some of you may not know it's 60 meters deep or more at the French Quarter, which has incredible groundwater pressure. And then you get this drawing on the right made by this groundwater expert about balancing groundwater, which is another key if you want your infrastructure investments to last. Groundwater balance is fundamental. Soils are fundamental. If we don't deal with these things, we're basically building our house upon worse than sand. So we take these areas of urban blight. This is Felicity Street. And we say, well, what could you do? And maybe you could create a water system. And this actually started at the river, but there's just this drawing at the end. And then you could have this area that had water somewhere out there instead, and probably has higher real estate value, and with or without the electrical poles. And then when it rains hard, you have a place the water goes so it doesn't just stand in the street and you can actually run. So if you go back to Dayu, you know, you're trying to get space for water and you're trying to get it below your feet. It's not that complex. But now I'll turn it to my good friend Derek and let him talk about Gutter to Gulf, and I'd like him to explain that title, if he will, since he's an architect too.
Thanks, David. Let me see if I can pull this one up. So, hi. Gutter to Gulf. It's kind of hard to, first of all, follow up David because his presentation seemed to get stronger and stronger and the message stronger and stronger as we go. But a couple of years ago, a colleague of mine, Jane Wolfe, who taught with me at Washington University in St. Louis and now has gone on to be the director of the Landscape Architecture Department at University of Toronto, we had been working down here in different ways with community groups or through Unified New Orleans Plan or with David for a number of years, and we thought, how could we start to help parallel and have students and academia enter into this conversation? And I know it's probably kind of difficult for me in this kind of venue to come to the table with student work in terms of how it gets perceived or received. But I think the importance is kind of to see how it becomes a message and an advocacy effort and less of pie in the sky ideas. So to back up a little bit, I've taught at WashU. I used to live in New Orleans, and I've taught this 5 studios now, the last 2 being Gutter to Gulf. And first, the idea of Gutter to Gulf, it's about working at different scales from the gutter of the house to the Gulf of Mexico. But the previous 3 studios, I was working with many different community groups within the city at different scales. So the title really here, the extraordinary the everyday and gutter to Gulf's pursuit of exposure really gets to the root of what we're after. That so many of these issues that we talk about, water management, what does it mean? It's so hard to uncover because it's rarely seen. But our work is not necessarily about, again, the extraordinary, the hurricane, the worst case scenario, as David was talking about. That deals with the much more regional issues and the perimeter issues. But again, it's the everyday. So we've got this condition right here. This is in February, a photograph that one of my students took in the upper 9th Ward of heavy rains leading to localized street flooding. But it just doesn't happen in the lower parts of the city. It also happens within Garden District. I don't think that's mine. No, it's not mine. But I took this photograph back in 2003 when I worked for David. This is right outside his office at the corner of Jackson and Britannia Street. And then this is the Washington Avenue Canal, Pumping Station 1 by Broad Street in the morning that one of my students took. And then later the afternoon, this was it filled up after heavy rain. So again, we get this, and most of the people, I think, in the audience here understand this, that water is out of sight and out of mind. Everything's been buried below the street, and the water levels in much parts of the city are above the eave lines, the gutters of the house. So again, to this idea of exposure, what we've had the students kind of trying to uncover is how do you work with accurate base information. So this is, again, not just pie-in-the-sky efforts where we're speculating on what does this street do, what does this neighborhood do in terms of water. We're trying to work with accurate information as best as we can. So these are some of the Sewerage and Water Board maps, and of courtesy working with Wagner and Ball and other sources. And we have a website that, if you go to guttertogulf.com, if you wish, that shows last year's work, the first year's worth of work. And the work itself, again, it's heavily based in research. So it's not a traditional architecture studio. It's architecture and urban design, but it's also kind of questioning what is architecture's role or architecture students' role within dealing with issues of water management, and how does design play a part of that as opposed to just engineering. So in the first phase of it, we were working with as best as we can with the base information. A lot of it was inaccurate. A lot of it was hard to find. It was a struggle for the students, but it's always good for students to struggle. And we started to build a series of models and do a series of drawings with the information that started to try to expose the infrastructure systems of the city. So this is a kind of a crazy model that we built and brought down to leave with David and the Dutch Dialogues effort of a model of New Orleans. It's not your typical model that just shows the streets and the houses, but actually shows all the layers of major infrastructure. So it has the major highways, the pumping stations, the underground drainage, the rail lines, the street network, and how those systems start to work together. And throughout the semester, so again, it was a 16-week semester, spring of 09, then the students came back after our field trip to New Orleans and kind of came up with a vocabulary for a water plan. So this is not a traditional master plan in any sense. It's just different words that deal with water and how they can operate across the city at different scales. So instead of just looking at the scale of the block or the lot, traditional architecture, students were also looking at what does it mean for water operate at the scale of the neighborhood, the scale of the sub-drainage unit, which would be more or less the scale of the planning districts of New Orleans, and of course the scale of the city, larger scale interventions within the city. So that was the first year. The second year, which was this past spring, we were able to, again with David's help and others, to be able to start to work with more accurate base information. And we started off the semester, and it's something that's ongoing as a question, and I think for people in the audience to think about as well. We had a threefold charge. And the first one was for the students to simply analyze the planning district and jurisdictional boundaries of the city and how they relate to the drainage units of the city, Drainage Basin 1 in particular. So this is a typical map of the flooding after Hurricane Katrina, and just highlighted as one of the planning districts, Planning District 2, that I worked a lot in back in the Unified New Orleans Plan days. I was the district manager for this district. And what we started to do was then see how does the physical structure of the city, that's on the left-hand side, the rail network, the levees, the soils, the open water, what you can see, how do they overlap with the policy aspects of the city, the invisible boundaries? And they don't, pretty much. So on the right, you can see these purplish and green zones. That's where these different political boundaries misalign or align with the sub-drainage units, which are what the pumping stations are based on in the city. The second aspect of this was to more accurately understand and expose the current hydrological systems. So back to this base map, this was a drawing that one of my students had done about rethinking what you can do with the neutral grounds in Gentilly neighborhood, Prentice Avenue, I think. And that this was, so it was like how you can start to expose it, how you can make it a public amenity, bike paths, et cetera. And then this past spring, my students with the better information were able to correct it, to realize, wait, what Andy, who now works for David, was drawing was interesting, but there were certain issues because of we didn't know what the culvert sizes were, et cetera. So this is a long-term, ongoing learning process that we're going through. And the third kind of main aspect of it was to generate classification systems of the drainage within the city. So the students and the faculty, we worked with them to develop taxonomies for the historic remnants, navigation routes of the city, open canals, and underground canal system. So for the historic remnants, we did a series of drawings to show the development of the city over time, and then a coding of how the different canals and drainage pathways were altered and got kind of out of whack with the issues of subsidence and development throughout the 20th century. And real simple cross-sections that showed what they used to look like and what they look like now. The navigation routes that start to take a step back and understand Drainage Basin 1 in New Orleans Parish within the larger structure of the region. And then construct, again, informational drawings that show how the aspects like the riverfront along the Mississippi have developed over time and become harder edges. Open canals are simple drawings that show the different types of canals that you can see, so such as Washington Canal or London Avenue Canal, and then how they relate to the larger drainage network of the city. And these are, again, trying with the best we can, base information and numbers to back it up. And then finally, were the underground canals, where we're showing how the water moves throughout the city in these different sub-drainage units in Drainage Basin 1, and the capacities that operate with them. And then a series of drawings that show all the different culverts, single box, double box, etc. These drawings start to talk about how water moves through neighborhoods and how it gets to these pipes and then eventually out to the lake. So in the bottom left, you can see these red lines that show on a dry day where the water goes, and out from, let's say, the Mississippi's river's edge along in the Garden District, the journey of the water will eventually make it out to Bayou Bienvenue. As opposed during wet times, it switches its route and goes out the Lake Pontchartrain. So we're really trying to uncover what this underlying system is and then how you engage with it and supplement it. So kind of 4 parts to our work: research, speculate, disseminate, and collaborate to make it within our sites, within our minds. What does it mean for the future of New Orleans? So it's not necessarily, again, these really wacky ideas of how we can live with water in the city, but trying to seek out more publicly visible ways to showcase the student work. This was a competition that a couple students entered for in Broadmoor neighborhood about speculating on affordable housing, and they were taking on the house prototype and using water really to be the main design component of the house. So you could create a water neutral house and site so it wouldn't burden any of the existing drainage system within the neighborhood. It didn't win the competition, unfortunately, but strong project. This is another project at a bigger scale where a student was doing a soil taxonomy. So he was specifically looking at Elysian Fields corridor. So David alluded to earlier in the Dutch dialogues, the Gentilly project that was looking at Elysian Fields connecting to the river to the lake. And the soils that exist throughout that transect or throughout that main boulevard change throughout. So it basically tells you, if you start to look at what type of tree plantings, tree types, soils, grasses that you use within that corridor to help mitigate the storm water, it changes. So instead of Elysian Fields being perceived, albeit gorgeous as it is with its live oak canopy and green all the way through, he was starting to question how people can inhabit that space in a varied kind of manner and then help from neighborhood to neighborhood mitigate the water storage system or the water system. And then finally, I'll kind of end on an ongoing project, and this isn't public yet, even though I'm saying it, it's public, but it's called, where if you go to this website, it'll say in production, but we're kind of making sure everything's tight. But the students are working on a website called NOLA is Water, so it's part of Gutter to Gulf. And it's going to be an educational, informational site for anyone to use. And we've put together a whole series of words that deal with water within the city. So you could click on these words, and if you go to one, for instance, wetland, you'll get these big kind of bold statements that everyone in the audience, I think, knows by now. And maybe, hopefully, more Americans know this kind of statement since our president said it. And then you go into it, and it's highly interactive. So you'll be able to see, and if I show the beta test of it right now, you can move your mouse all throughout these areas of the city and see how the different drainage units work. And then some other infographics to say like what a mature cypress tree can uptake 440 gallons of water a day, which is 9 bathtubs. That's pretty impressive. But we, I guess, continue to plant palm trees. Sorry. NOLA is Water. We're going to continue it further to start to raise more awareness, or maybe turn it into some sort of a wiki-based website. And these are not developed yet, but we'd like to try to go forward with it. Where you could go in and import someone can say a pothole was falling right in front of my eyes or something, and enter it. I mean, there's big challenges with how you control this information and disseminate it, but I think it's important, the legibility. And then finally, I'm starting to take Gutter to Gulf and try to, just like with David's work and the Dutch Dialogues work, to go global. So we can really start to ask questions of, I think it's very important to be comparing deltas and urbanisms and the watersheds around the world, but I think we have to be really careful why we're comparing them. I mean, the issues of politics and socioeconomics can involve, but so we're going to start to have the students and myself look bigger scale. And this is a really cool map that I'll end on that David's office put together that shows New Orleans in relation to other cities. Thanks.
I was always troubled by the fact that, as a kid, you got a globe, and New Orleans is at 30, and you go around, and Cairo's at 30, and our river flows this way, and theirs flows this way. I didn't realize that opposite us in the northern hemisphere is Tibet. So why are we so low and they're so high, and we couldn't split the middle somewhere? I don't know. But anyway, it's interesting. Also, I think that students at Toronto or Washington University in St. Louis like this study of New Orleans, this idea about New Orleans. I think the idea has staying power, but it's hard to stay if we only promote and we don't actually start to implement, design first and implement. We have to begin design. So Dutch Dialogue 3, and I'll go through what we did this time. There are 1 or 2 major points here, maybe some other things we can go quickly. It's still an iterative process where we work for 3 days. We looked this time at the middle scale. We looked at the area between the London Avenue and Orleans Avenue canals and the Lafitte Corridor, which brought back closer to the river. This makes the point, where's the water? It was the first thing, the first Dutch Dialogue, the question was where are the water, and the idea that came out was delta urbanism, connecting us to other delta cities, dealing with us as an urban delta. If you go back and trace our condition, a point that we need to understand is that New Orleans was at or above sea level in 1700 when they settled there. That's the green area, but if you look at the section below, the lake is on the right, and you look out there to that silver line, that was the horizon, and that was a back swamp, but basically it was land at sea level or just above. And as time went on, we've gotten to this condition where maybe some of the city's 8 feet, even more below sea level, because we drained it, because we tried to dry it out so we could live there. And you see that line that goes across on the bottom from the top of the levee, which is the flood wall that those girls were trying to look over. How'd they get up there? I don't know that. This is a east-west section. If you remember, the same hand that drew the north-south section drew the east-west section here. And what you see is an exaggerated perspective again, and you see how absurd that really is with those stem walls, those highway walls on top of those outfall canals, with the bayou in the middle, and then that line that's dotted across is sea level, so you see this besides, and you're remembering the soils. The existing outfall canal system is, in a way, the current Battle of New Orleans. I don't know the right victory to search for, but this asks that question. That's the Orleans Avenue Canal on the left, London on the right, and the pumping station back inside. That was the fairgrounds where the racetrack where we have the jazz festival in the middle. So if you actually get to look inside there, this is what you see. Maybe they don't want to have to maintain it, so they don't really, they keep the walls out so they don't have to cut the grass, so to speak. But you can't maintain that. The point is that if you go there and you scour that, you undermine the wall. So we have, ultimately, a failing situation. There are 15 and a half miles of those walls in the city of New Orleans. Option one, this lingo, those of us who live in New Orleans, and I apologize for the New Orleans-centric perspective. It's not my sole capability. But in that thing, option one, the Corps of Engineers, is to leave those walls there and basically close it off, and you're going to have to reinforce those walls, and you're going to live with them ad infinitum. So option two, or another thing, becomes possible once you put these permanent closure structures at the outside. The permanent closure structures are in process of a design build. Very complicated drawing. I've looked at it many times and it confuses me still. But you see the pump station needs to be 54 feet above sea level. You got to get the water out at about 10 and a half feet below sea level. But the number that's troublesome is the either minus 37 or minus 29. That water is going to be 29 feet below sea level there. The ground's 8 feet below sea level. There's no real benefit even if you take the walls down, because now you got to put a wall up to keep it from falling in because it's so deep. So that's what option two would look like. You could actually take the walls down and the water level's way down, but then you've got the freeboard so that you can then get rid of the canals and it'll drain by gravity. So this is what officially we in New Orleans want. You know, Sewage and Water Board wants it, the City of New Orleans wants it, Jefferson Parish wants it, the State of Louisiana probably wants it. But we asked, because this is nobody pays us to do this stuff, right? So we can say what we want, you know. We asked, is there another way? So the idea that was put forward in Dutch Dialogue 3 was, and this is the large-scale issue, Karen, this is the bigger scale thinking that sometimes you want to engage in, is, okay, you take down those walls and you get this area here where you can work with the top of the levee at about +5. And you deepen it some, but you keep pumps in place so you create an operating system. And you also look for opportunities to widen the canal to increase the storage capacity, because it's all about storage capacity. Water doesn't, unless it's Noah's time, 40 days and 40 nights, it dissipates. And you can get rid of it, but you have a place to hold it. So what we proposed in this, and this is quick, 3 days work, was to create a circulating water system that in fact uses Bayou St. John as the source of water into the city. If the lake's at +1, the bayou's about minus half a foot, it's minus 0.6, I won't get too technical, but you'd set the water level in these canals at -5, and what you've got then is a system where water moves all the time. And now we don't worry the mosquitoes, it's slightly brackish. So anyway, without going into more detail of it, that is the big idea of Dutch Dialogue 3. It's also, because I'm a moderate, I suppose, it's an intermediate cost component to option 1 or option 2. But it is where all the benefits are. You know, why make investment if there's no benefit in it? So what we get is the London Avenue Canal becoming a green sward with water in it. So instead of this, which we have now, you get this. And you get this opportunity to create this space alongside. And I would dare say that the real estate value would grow higher and that abandoned little brown house would become something else over time, because now I'm living next to water. So you get the London Avenue Canal then, and this is behind Dillard, where there's abandoned space, and you need the water storage capacity, so you use it for that, and you create a park with water. Bayou St. John and the Lafitte Carter were the second thing we looked at, and Bayou St. John's the reason the city's being there. It's Louisiana. I shouldn't explain that too much, but the bayou was truncated. The Lafitte Carter was the Carondelet Canal, so it was originally a waterway that connected to the French Quarter. By 1800, there was a waterway there. There are different identities through there. Those stars there are big moves possible. We do want to think small and big at all scales. This is pretty much where you have to go show somebody what water could be like in New Orleans. That's fundamentally what we have. You can visit the lake, you can visit the river, but this is what people live. It's a desirable component of life, good real estate, good place to live. However, it just ends. Water stagnates, it truncates, and it's just cut off now. So what this plan looks at is, well, if the bayou's coming from the top, you could actually let it continue, create a bigger space for water there at this turning point at Jefferson Davis, and then you get something looking back toward the city where this is no longer just a dead end of a bayou. It becomes quite a nice public space, festival, whatever you want, but it's a good place to celebrate this condition of water. The Lafitte Carter then is this extension that goes to the back of the French Quarter. It's a fallow right-of-way that through Lake Douglas, who may or may not be here anymore, and some others' advocacy, is going to be designed into something. The city owns it all. It's like this now and like this now. This is what we call, this is drainage, but it's certainly only, it's a hazard more than a benefit. And you look at other ways to put water in there. Maybe these sections are too technical, but the one on the bottom is, the existing's on the top. The one on the bottom is putting water above water, which is an interesting concept that the Dutch love, and so do I. But I've also found out, having photographed this in Tokyo, that the Japanese do it too. That's water above water. That's a little creek above water storage and drainage in the Aragawa Ward, which is quite a bit below sea level. So these ideas, there's only one planet here, and there are only so many ideas, and whether there's anything new or not. But then water identities would change as you go down that, so that in an area, as you get closer to the French Quarter, that's the old canal on the left, the current condition on the right, you would get a different kind of identity. It's not an insistent one thing. That would be a brackish identity at the other end. At this end, it would be a fresh identity. And that may or may not interest anybody. It does me. You'd get different kinds of biological, different kinds of life there, different kinds of activities. So at the turning basin, you would have had this, but you won't get that back. You get something more like this, which is a source of water, a spring, groundwater. City Park we looked at. City Park has a master plan. We're respectful of that. Bob Becker gave us his time and sat there. But the basic thing is that on the right, you see water added. So it's an enhanced water structure for the park, which does things for the neighborhood. And then the park would hold more water, probably have higher value, maybe get me there on a Sunday afternoon in that case. And it's already building on the park's identity. That is City Park, which is another place you can see water in New Orleans. So then we brought it back to a district plan. And then at the district plan, there are all these different identities for water. That's City Park on the left in the big area. The idea is this is not engineering, it's more a vascular system. It's not just a drainage system. But there are these different identities from house to block to neighborhood to district-wide. And so I think it's fair to say that there are private responsibilities as well as public. And one of the things we advocate is Derek's gutter to gulf thing is you take care of the water that falls on your site and slow it down instead of just pushing it into the street and then saying, why does my street flood? So disconnect the downspout would be a phrase that would stick there, I think. Plant cypress trees. And then when you get in city lots, they can hold water, and then you can get rain gardens. Portland has a program, why not us? We have these fallow neutral grounds without much in them, and they can be small canals connected. And then you get this plated water identity possible with lots that are vacant. So you create a different kind of identity in the area. How do you get there in conclusion? This is a slide from Del Taurus. Del Taurus is the research institute that Senator Landrieu has her eyes on for us. We'd like that. Urban water management plan is what they say. Well, we think so too. We think that exercise, that consensus-based process, can move this forward. We have operated in this other thing. We have not been in the conventional role in transition management terms. We are change agents outside the system doing this process here. I think somebody might recognize herself in that picture. But this is what it's for, I suppose, repose, to be in a nice city. People come and sit there in the sun. And the last slide really makes the point that the Dutch ambassador made at the last conference, which is inscribed on the Dutch Stock Exchange, which is something, unless we want to be stupid and poor the rest of our lives, we should take into account, which is costs come before benefits. How do we make our investments? How did a country with 16 million people get to be so well-to-do? Well, they made smart investments. And I think we need to be smart about how we spend our money as well as our time and invest in our future, which is what this is a call to do. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. It's very informative and is attainable. There have been great strides at having this discussion at the federal level, international level, the local level, and I also want to applaud David and the Louisiana Recovery Authority Office of Community Development now for $2 million that's going to the Jefferson Parish, St. Bernard, and Orleans. Is that correct? For a water management plan?
I believe so.
Which, gets us to a real step further. Now I'll open it up for questions. Does anyone have anything? Yes. Yeah. So have you given thought to recreational and bike paths for the public use along the way?
Certainly. I think your image is one of the, I mean, as a not an art student, but it's one of the things you remember about the paintings of the Netherlands, right? That they skated on the ice and all those pictures of the people skating. I hadn't thought about that. It was because there wasn't that much public property otherwise. Not to answer your question, but to make the point, the Dutch take climate change as fact because those don't freeze anymore. They rarely freeze. So their history that we all know is not their current because it's too warm now and the canals don't freeze. But if you look at the Lafitte exercise we did, that really has always space for a bicycle path. If you look at the condition along the London Avenue Canal in that drawing, there was room for bicycle or walking paths. Yes, definitely that's what this is. You come down to the water and enjoy it.
If I could just comment on St. John, we see people boating and fishing.
Right. But that gets into our particular perspective as property owners because, Angela, by St. John has some very low bridges. And those were put there on purpose to keep people from boating because they were motor boating. So, two wrongs give us a mess, right? I know, but, if you watch, bridge design would be actually something that in the Netherlands, that's a wonderful project, a bridge design. We don't think enough about that. But that's, again, about the passage of the boat underneath on the water.
Anyone else? Michael?
Go back to the water and the benefits of that.
That double-decker canal?
Yeah.
You want to try?
Do you want me to answer that one?
Well, he worked in that group, so I can answer it, I think, but I'm curious to let my friend Derek see how that discussion occurred.
Well, I think one of the our Dutch colleague Stein Kool, we call him Cole,
Yeah.
I call him Kool, came up with that. But part of the issue that isn't quite resolved with the Lafitte corridor, but it's also topography. So you have water moving from different directions. So the double-decker one, if it's coming in from Bayou St. John, it's potentially coming towards the French Quarter, the drainage system canal below. If you saw in the section, we actually widened that culvert to be able to get water easier to, I don't remember which one, it was Orleans or London Avenue Canal.
We were trying to get more water to Orleans because London actually has less capacity. There's a culvert needed.
And you could also use an existing infrastructure that's in place. So instead of opening up that culvert that you saw in that one image with those, to be able to get water easier to, I don't remember which one, it was Orleans or London Avenue Canal.
We were trying to get more water to Orleans because London actually has less capacity. There's a culvert needed.
And you could also use an existing infrastructure that's in place. So instead of opening up that culvert that you saw in that one image with those shopping carts in it and having this potentially treacherous 20-foot deep condition, you could box that part, but then on top of that still have a secondary system. Part of that secondary system would also be local management, so block level management, potentially filtering the water, cleaning the water, how do the bike paths, et cetera, interact with that. So it's water doing different tasks.
Different elevations, but going different directions. One's drainage and one's water and soil, groundwater nourishment at the same time.
Gentleman on the second row.
Talked about a water neutral site, and I'm just thinking that here in Baton Rouge, it's so cheap for the end user to just turn on the faucet that the monetary incentives aren't really there from the water conservation side. So I'm
Right.
wondering if are we seeing any incentives coming from folks that the entity that has to deal with stormwater management? Are there any monetary incentives coming from that side to make the site water neutral?
I'm not I don't know what the state is right now in New Orleans, but I think that in terms of incentives, but I know, correct me if I'm wrong, that cisterns are illegal, right? You can't have a water cistern because of the mosquito problem, right? You can't store, I mean, in St. Louis, I'm allowed to have a rain barrel and I collect my own water and water my plants, right? We've got mosquitoes too. I mean,
Yeah, that's State Health Department, that cistern thing, and City of New Orleans Sewage and Water Board, and I was told this week by the city's Department of Sustainability, they're going to break that. You know, we are the only state in the country, I don't like that, you know, I'm from Louisiana. We're the only state in the country that makes you put a backflow preventer on a solar panel. Because, I mean, if nobody else has to, because it's going to somehow pollute so it's just, again, regulations can be problematic, which I think is probably one of the big questions. How do we change our environment? Your question, though, is a forward question, which is there a way that you could incentivize stormwater retention on if I can disconnect my downspout and keep the water on my site instead of pushing it out into my neighborhood street, is there some benefit I get? And I think that would be creative, and I think that's some research that probably could be furthered.
Gentleman in the back.
This is going to be a comment phrased in the form of ultimately a question. I'm going to ask this. I know there's some civil engineers in this audience, and I am not myself a civil engineer. I'm a city planner. Both my degrees are from schools seen as pretty good engineering schools, LSU, Georgia Tech. Where are the civil engineers, David? On this panel, I attended last year, and I attended this year.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
From them. So if you all want to comment on that, feel free. Unless you all want to beat me up outside. I'm fine.
A quick word, I know that this year is the first year that PEHs, or professional development hours, are offered for engineers to come to this. And that's a big step, it's a big incentive to get more people here. And speaking for my own firm, last year I saw 2 folks, and this year there's, I think, about 10. So I think that effort you made, and it's an excellent sign.
I applaud the comment. I think that I've said before, and maybe wrongly, but I'll say it again, that I think engineering is a fallen discipline. You know, engineering is a great discipline. It's critical. You know, you have to make this stuff work. Dutch Dialogues, the workshops have had good engineering participation. There's somebody who represents an engineering company sitting over there. The Dutch are a good model again, because the engineer is not unfettered in the Netherlands. The engineer actually is working in concert with urban designers, landscape architects, and it's probably not as quick and easy as it is to work for the Corps of Engineers here, because the metric of success is more complex, not just time and money, right? I mean, because the easiest thing is, did you build it on time and in the budget? Anybody who's out there trying to solicit architectural engineering work knows that those are the phrases: on time, on budget. Built what? You know, how's it going to work? Who's going to achieve benefit? Do the people like it? Where's the feedback cycle? But you know, DHV, Haskoning, and Arcadis have all participated in this. And as we go forward, the engineers really have important role. The role varies, in my mind, depending a little bit on the scale of the work. Everywhere the engineer needs some involvement, somewhere the landscape architect needs some involvement. But if you start talking about that water system, I can't front this. I got to have an engineer who can calculate and do the hydraulics and know something about formulas that I never knew or forgot.
You and I know the coastal works that we were talking about, those clearly are purely engineering, kind of coastal protection.
Well, I'd say even they aren't purely, because there are biological issues that are involved in those. And, you know, there's a conference, a small conference coming up in Venice on the August 29th that I get to go to. And that's really partly engineering and partly landscape about our river diversions. Because they affect people. You know, what does any of it matter? Well, it's not just people, but it's life that we're involving. But I applaud your coming back. I really appreciate that you thought whatever we said last year. And remember Dale Morris? Remember that name? Because Dale Morris weren't for Dale Morris, we wouldn't have any of this done. He's with the Dutch Embassy. He was here last year. But we need more engineering. And anybody who has any influence on Scott Cowan or Tulane University, please say it's time to reverse that.
So we have a minute and a half. Any questions? Yes, in the back.
I saw in the drawings, I know you went through them a little quickly to get to the presentation, but I saw a lot of emphasis on recreational use of these new water corridors. I was wondering if you also put any thought into commercial use. And I remember right after the storm, there was talk about turning New Orleans into the Venice of America. I thought that was a really exciting idea. And I'm glad that people are really actually starting to engage in something like that. And I can just imagine having, taking a gondolier ride from the corridor down into another part of the city that you might normally not go into, and having commercial development come from that. And probably it'd be a lot faster than streetcars too.
I think that's a good idea. I think one of my heroes, I show my age, was John Lennon. And he said a working class hero is something to be. We have the industrial canal. We don't talk much about the industrial canal. It's a waterway that we're underutilizing. I mean, we're really not even paying attention. I mean, this is only scratching the surface of the water identity and possibility of the city of New Orleans. I mean, we talk about the outfall canals. The industrial canal is a major waterway. What's the economic potential of that also? So I think your question, and I think one of the weaknesses in this process, and that's where, if I am good to my words, you learn from what you're doing, is we really don't talk enough about the economics of this. Not just how much it costs to build, but what the economic benefits and possibilities that generate from it are. And,
that recreational or transportation aspect is one.
And to follow up on that, at the end of the day, 4:55, there's a session on best practices in the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. And CPECs have partnered, combining science, engineering, land use planning, to put together best practices for all of our coastal communities to think about how to better integrate and live with water. So if you want more on that, stand. End of the day. One more question, and yes? Yeah, what area are you from? So I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Louisiana Recovery Authority, now OCD, recently put out $8 million of grants for planning, and the basis of it was land use planning, water management, to become more resilient. And so I'm hoping that we'll see a lot more come out of that, the forethought that they gave into that grant program. You want to add it? Okay, great. Well, let's give these gentlemen a round of applause.